The poorest schoolteacher in town just received a telegram, $200 to change her life or stay in a place where she owes rent and survives on bruised apples. But staying means keeping a promise to a boy who believes only she can teach him. What would you do? The school bell clanged 7:30, and Mercy Hollander swept the last of yesterday's chalk dust into her dustpan. October wind pressed against the windows of Cedar Ridge's one-room schoolhouse, and she pulled her thin shawl tighter around shoulders that seemed to grow sharper each week. The children had gone home an hour past, but she lingered, stretching her daily wage of 50 cents as far as it would reach. Her fingers found the apple in her coat pocket, bruised and soft, rescued from the refuse pile behind Harper's Hotel. She bit through the brown skin, chewing slowly. The sweet-sour flesh quieted her stomach's complaints, if only for a moment. Miss Hollander, she startled, nearly dropping the apple. In the doorway stood Thomas Chen, the telegraph operator's boy, his wool coat buttoned neat against the cold. Behind him, lamplight spilled from the telegraph office where his mother bent over her needle, mending a customer's torn shirt seam for 10 cents. "Your mother sent word," Thomas said, his English careful and precise. "The preacher's wife needs her dress hemmed before Sunday service. She'll pay 20 cents. 20 cents. Mercy's heart quickened. With her teaching wage and the sewing, she might afford both lamp oil and a pound of cornmeal this week. She slipped the apple back into her pocket. "Tell Mrs. Chen I'll be there directly." Thomas nodded and disappeared into the gathering dusk. Mercy locked the schoolhouse door, her keyring jangling against the brass plate her predecessor had left behind, a small luxury she couldn't bring herself to remove, though it served no purpose beyond memory. The walk to the telegraph office took her past the Mercantile, where golden light pooled on the boardwalk. Through the window, she glimpsed shelves lined with tins of peaches, sacks of white flour, and wheels of cheese wrapped in red wax. Her mouth watered, but she hurried on. "Mrs. Chen looked up from her work as Mercy entered. Steam from the kettle on the office stove fogged the windows, and the older woman's calloused hands moved with practiced efficiency. "Good evening, Mercy." Mrs. Chen's accent carried the cadence of distant mountains, though she'd lived in Cedar Ridge longer than most. Mrs. Hartford's dress blue wool with lace collar. "She wants the hem shortened 2 inches. She pulled a wrapped bundle from beneath the counter. "Work by lamplight if you must. She needs it before Sunday service." Mercy accepted the package, feeling the quality of the fabric through the brown paper. "I'll have it finished by Saturday evening." "Good girl." Mrs. Chen returned to her mending. "Thomas, check the evening wires." The boy moved to the telegraph key, its brass gleaming under the lamp. As Mercy turned to leave, the machine began its rapid chatter. Thomas bent over his pad, pencil scratching across paper. "What news tonight?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Weather report from Denver." Early snow coming through the pass. Mercy paused at the threshold. Early snow meant the supply wagon from Cheyenne might be delayed, driving up prices at the Mercantile. She'd need to stretch her cornmeal even further. The bell tower struck 8 as she stepped into the street. Most of the town's windows glowed with warm light, families gathered around dinner tables she could only imagine. She pulled the dress bundle close and walked toward her boarding house room, where a stub of candle waited to light her needle's work through the long night ahead. Behind her, the telegraph key resumed its urgent tapping, carrying news of the approaching storm into the darkness. Saturday morning brought the scent of snow on the wind. Mercy finished the last stitches on Mrs. Hartford's dress as the church bell struck 6. Her candle burned to a puddle of wax. Her neck ached from bending over the fine blue wool, but the 20 cents would buy lamp oil enough for a week. She wrapped the dress in clean paper and stepped into the grey dawn. Frost painted the boardwalk silver, and her breath misted in the cold air. The Mercantile wouldn't open for another hour, but she could deliver the dress to Mrs. Hartford's house on Elm Street. The preacher's wife answered her knock with flour dusting her apron. "Miss Hollander, you're up early. I finished your dress, Mum." Mercy unwrapped the bundle, displaying the shortened hem. Mrs. Hartford held the dress to the window light, examining each stitch. Beautiful work. Here she pressed 2 silver dimes into Mercy's palm. "And take this." From her kitchen, she brought a small jar of apple butter and 3 biscuits wrapped in checkered cloth. from yesterday's baking. They'll only go stale. Mercy's throat tightened. Thank you, ma'am. Have you given thought to my husband's offer? The church could use a regular seamstress. There's talk of a new altar cloth for Christmas. I'll consider it carefully. Mrs. Hartford nodded. The Lord provides, child. Even when we can't see his plan. Mercy walked back toward town, the jar of apple butter warm against her palm. At the mercantile, she bought a small bottle of lamp oil for 15 cents, leaving her 5 cents for emergencies. The apple butter would sweeten her cornmeal porridge for days to come. She was spreading one of Mrs. Hartford's biscuits with the golden preserve when footsteps approached her boarding house door. Through the thin walls, she heard Mrs. Kowalski, the landlady, speaking with someone in the hallway. She's 3 weeks behind on rent, Mrs. Kowalski was saying. Sweet girl, works hard, but I can't run a charity house. How much does she owe? The voice was unfamiliar, a woman's voice, cultured and kind. $4.50. If she can't pay by Monday, I'll have to ask her to find other arrangements. Mercy set down her biscuit, appetite fled. $4.50. More money than she'd see in a month, even with extra sewing work. The voices moved away down the hall. Mercy pressed her ear to the door, but heard only the scrape of boots on floorboards and the slam of the front door. She pulled her mother's wedding ring from its hiding place in her sewing box, the last valuable thing she owned. The thin gold band caught the morning light as she turned it in her palm. At Jameson's pawn shop, it might fetch $3, maybe $4 if she bargained well. The church bell struck 8. Sunday service would begin in an hour, and she'd promised to help Mrs. Chen with inventory at the telegraph office afterward. If she worked quickly, she might have enough for the rent and a small store of food before the supply wagon arrived with inflated prices. She slipped the ring into her coat pocket alongside the apple she'd saved from yesterday and stepped into the street where the first snow of winter had begun to fall. The pawn shop occupied a narrow building between the barber shop and the assay office, its windows crowded with pocket watches, hunting rifles, and jewelry that told stories of desperation. Mercy hesitated at the threshold, her mother's ring burning like a coal in her palm. Abraham Jameson looked up from his ledger, spectacles perched on his nose. Miss Hollander, what brings you by on a Sunday morning? She placed the ring on his counter, the gold band looking small and fragile against the scarred wood. I need to know what this might be worth. Jameson lifted the ring to the window light, examining it through a jeweler's loupe. 14 carat. Nice craftsmanship. Where did you come by this? It was my mother's. He nodded, understanding, passing between them without words. I could offer $3.50. Not enough. Not quite enough. Mercy bit her lip, calculating. It's all I have of her. I understand. Jameson set the ring gently on the counter. But I also understand Mrs. Kowalski's been asking questions about your rent. Heat flushed Mercy's cheeks. In a town of 300 souls, everyone knew everyone's business. $4, $3.75. Final offer. She stared at the ring, remembering her mother's hands as she kneaded bread, the gold band clicking against the wooden bowl. Sarah Hollander had worn it through 23 years of marriage, through good harvests and lean times, until consumption took her voice and finally her breath. Keep it for now, Mercy whispered, pulling the ring back toward herself. Let me think. Jameson's expression softened. Miss Hollander, Mercy, there might be another way. She looked up, hope flickering. My wife's been wanting help with our boy, little Samuel. He's bright but restless, and Martha's hands are full with the new baby. If you could tutor him evenings, say 3 times a week, we could pay 50 cents a session. 50 cents, 3 times a week, $1.50, enough to stay ahead of the rent. What would you want me to teach him? Reading, writing, some arithmetic. Martha says you've done wonders with the other children at the school. Mercy felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening after a long winter. Someone had noticed her work. Someone valued what she could offer beyond her needle and thread. I'd like that very much, Mr. Jameson, he smiled. Martha will be pleased. Can you start Tuesday evening? She nodded, sliding her mother's ring back into her pocket. Thank you. As she stepped into the falling snow, the church bell began its call to morning service. Mercy pulled her thin shawl tighter and walked toward the white-painted building where Mrs. Hartford would be wearing the blue dress with its carefully shortened hem. For the first time in weeks, her stomach didn't gnaw with hunger. For the first time in longer than that, she walked with her chin lifted against the wind. Tuesday evening found Mercy at the Jameson house, a neat frame building behind the pawn shop. Mrs. Martha Jameson welcomed her with a tired smile, baby Rose sleeping against her shoulder. "Samuel's in the kitchen," Martha whispered. "He's eager to meet you." The boy waited at a scrubbed pine table, slate and chalk arranged with military precision. 7 years old, with his father's serious eyes, he watched Mercy settle into the chair across from him. "Papa says you're the smartest lady in Cedar Ridge," Samuel said without preamble. Mercy laughed softly. "Your papa's very kind. What would you like to learn first?" "Everything." She began with letters, watching Samuel form careful A's and B's on his slate. His hunger for knowledge reminded her of herself at that age, before her father's drinking and her mother's illness narrowed her world to survival. "Tell me about the schoolhouse," Samuel said as they worked through simple addition. "Papa says you teach all the children, big ones and little ones together." "I do. 23 students this year, ages 6 to 14. Do you like it?" The question caught her off guard. When had anyone last asked what she liked? "Yes," she said slowly. "Yes, I do like it." Samuel beamed and returned to his sums. After an hour, Martha paid her 50 cents and pressed a jar of vegetable soup into her hands. "From yesterday's batch. Samuel, tell Miss Hollander goodbye." The boy threw his arms around her waist, quick and fierce. "Will you come back Thursday?" "I'll come back." Walking home through the November dusk, Mercy felt something she'd almost forgotten, the satisfaction of work that fed more than just her body. Samuel's eager questions, his careful letters, the way his face lit up when he solved a problem correctly. This was why she'd wanted to teach in the first place. The feeling lasted until she reached her boarding house and found Mrs. Kowalski waiting in the parlor. "Mercy, dear, sit down." The landlady's tone made her stomach clench. She perched on the edge of the horsehair sofa, still clutching the jar of soup. "I've had an inquiry about your room," Mrs. Kowalski said gently. "A gentleman from Denver, traveling through on railroad business. He's offered to pay 2 weeks in advance." "Mrs. Kowalski, please. I have work now, tutoring work. I can pay what I owe." The older woman's face creased with sympathy. "How much work, dear?" $1.50 a week, plus my teaching salary. "I can have your money by Friday." "That's what you said last week." Mercy's hands tightened on the soup jar. "1 more week, please." Mrs. Kowalski sighed. "The gentleman needs an answer by Wednesday evening. If you can pay half of what you owe by then, $2.25, I'll give you until month's end for the rest." $2.25. Mercy calculated quickly. Her tutoring session Thursday would bring another 50 cents. But that left her short by nearly $2. Her mother's ring would cover it, but then what about food, lamp oil, the necessities that kept body and soul together? "Wednesday evening," she agreed. Mrs. Kowalski patted her hand. "You're a good girl, Mercy." "I wish times weren't so hard." In her room, Mercy set the soup jar on her washstand and pulled out her sewing basket. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, lay her mother's ring. The gold caught the lamplight, and she could almost hear Sarah Hollander's voice. "Do what you must, but keep your head up. You're stronger than you know." She had one day to find $2.25, or lose the only home she'd known in Cedar Ridge. Through her thin walls, she heard the telegraph key chattering in the distance, carrying news and messages across the vast Western Territory. Somewhere in those signals might be word of work, opportunity, hope. But the machine spoke a language of dots and dashes that offered her no answers. Mercy ate her soup by lamplight and tried not to think about sleeping in the cold. Wednesday afternoon brought news that changed everything. Mercy was sweeping the schoolhouse steps when Thomas Chen ran up the street, his breath coming in white puffs. "Miss Hollander! Come quick, Mama! Needs you at the telegraph office!" She followed him through the gathering crowd outside the Western Union building. Inside, Mrs. Chen stood over the telegraph key, her face pale with excitement. "What is it?" Mercy asked. Mrs. Chen held up a yellow telegram form, her hands shaking slightly. It's from the Territorial Education Commission in Cheyenne. They're looking for qualified teachers to establish schools in the new mining camps. The pay, she paused, rereading the message. The pay is $200 for a 6-month term, plus housing. $200. More money than Mercy had seen in her entire life. They need someone immediately. Mrs. Chen continued. The mining camp at Silver Creek has 50 children with no schooling. The company will provide transportation and supplies. Thomas bounced on his toes. Mama says you're the best teacher in the territory. Mercy's mind raced. $200 would solve every problem she faced. The rent, the constant hunger, the uncertainty that followed her like a shadow. But Silver Creek was 3 days' journey into the mountains, far from everything familiar. When would I have to leave? She asked. The supply wagon leaves Friday morning. If you're interested, I need to send a reply by tonight. Friday. 2 days from now. Mercy thought of Samuel Jameson waiting for his Thursday evening lesson, of Mrs. Hartford's promise of church sewing work, of the small roots she'd begun to grow in Cedar Ridge. Miss Hollander? Thomas watched her with bright, curious eyes. Are you going to be famous? Before she could answer, the office door banged open, and Abraham Jameson entered, shaking snow from his coat. Martha sent me to fetch Samuel home for supper. He paused, noticing the tension in the room. Is everything all right? Mrs. Chen explained about the telegram. Jameson listened, his expression growing thoughtful. $200 is a fortune, he said finally. But Silver Creek's rough country. Mining camps come and go. What happens when the silver plays out? The commission will reassign qualified teachers to other posts, Mrs. Chen read from the telegram. It says here they're expanding education throughout the territory. Jameson nodded slowly. It's a fine opportunity, Miss Hollander. A chance to build something lasting. Mercy felt the weight of decision pressing down on her shoulders. Stay in Cedar Ridge with its familiar struggles, or leap into the unknown for the promise of financial security. I need to think, she said. Mrs. Chen handed her the telegram. Keep this. Send word by 8 o'clock if you want me to wire your acceptance. As Mercy walked home, the yellow paper crinkled in her pocket next to her mother's ring. 2 paths stretched before her, one leading deeper into the mountains where silver gleamed in the earth, the other winding through the narrow streets of a town that had become, almost without her noticing, something like home. The church bell struck 5. 3 hours to decide the course of her future. At 7:30, Mercy stood in the telegraph office with her decision made. The room buzzed with evening activity, Mrs. Chen transcribing messages from the chattering key, Thomas updating the weather board with reports from Denver, Abraham Jameson discussing freight schedules with the station agent. Through the frosted windows, she could see the boarding house where her packed satchel waited on the bed. I'll take the position, she told Mrs. Chen. The older woman smiled and reached for her telegraph form. I'll send word immediately. Wait. The voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Samuel Jameson, small face serious beneath his wool cap. Miss Hollander. You can't leave, Samuel, his father said gently. Miss Hollander has important work to do. The boy stepped into the room, his boots leaving wet prints on the wooden floor. But she promised to teach me about fractions tomorrow, and Mrs. Hartford needs help with the Christmas pageant. And his voice broke slightly. And who's going to make the little children laugh during arithmetic? Mercy knelt to his level, her throat tight. There will be other teachers, Samuel, but not you. Behind her, she heard the telegraph key go silent. The room held its breath, waiting. The supply wagon's already loaded, the station agent said quietly. If you're going, Miss Hollander, we need to know tonight. Mercy looked around the room at Mrs. Chen, with her patient hands and kind eyes, at Thomas learning his father's trade, at Abraham Jameson, who'd offered her work when she'd nearly sold her last precious thing, at Samuel, whose hunger for learning mirrored her own. $200. Security. A future beyond. Scraping for rent money and gnawing hunger. But also, the children who trusted her, the small community that had begun to feel like home, the roots she'd started to grow in rocky ground. Mrs. Chen, she said slowly, could you send a different message? Of course. Mercy took the telegraph form and wrote carefully, Position appreciated but must decline. Recommend checking with teachers in Laramie or Casper. Good luck with Silver Creek School. Samuel threw his arms around her before she'd even finished writing. Over his head, she met Abraham Jameson's eyes and saw something like pride there. Are you certain? Mrs. Chen asked gently. Mercy thought of her mother's ring, still safe in her pocket. She thought of the boarding house room where she'd count every penny until month's end. She thought of the long winter ahead with its familiar struggles. I'm certain. Mrs. Chen nodded and began tapping out the message. As the dots and dashes carried Mercy's refusal across the territory, Thomas Chen brought her a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. Mama, he said, ask Miss Hollander about tutoring me too. I want to learn about teaching. Abraham Jameson chuckled. Seems you've started something, Miss Hollander. Through the window, snow continued to fall, blanketing Cedar Ridge in winter white. Mercy sipped her coffee and watched the flakes drift past the lamplight. $200 would have solved her immediate problems, but it wouldn't have bought her this, the warmth of belonging, the satisfaction of work that mattered, the simple gift of being needed. Mrs. Chen finished sending the telegram and looked up with a smile. Done. Now, about your rent situation, Martha and I have been talking. The church ladies want to hire you for sewing work through Christmas. Between that and your tutoring, you should manage fine. Thank you, Mercy whispered. Samuel tugged on her coat sleeve. Miss Hollander, will you still teach me about fractions tomorrow? She ruffled his hair. I'll still teach you about fractions. As the group prepared to close the office for the night, Abraham Jameson handed Mercy an envelope. Your tutoring payment for tonight. Even though we didn't have our lesson, Samuel did his learning right here. 50 cents that would buy lamp oil and cornmeal, enough to see her through another week. Walking home through the snow, Mercy felt her mother's ring warm against her palm through the fabric of her pocket. She'd keep it safe a little longer, this last piece of Sarah Hollander's love. There would be other difficult days ahead, other choices to make. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. The boarding house windows glowed yellow in the darkness, promising warmth and the familiar comfort of home. Spring came early to Cedar Ridge, and with it, news that the Silver Creek mining camp had folded after 3 months when the vein played out. Mercy heard this from Mrs. Chen while delivering the finished altar cloth she'd sewn through the winter evenings. 47 people left without work, Mrs. Chen said, shaking her head. The teacher they hired had to find her own way back to Cheyenne. Mercy thought of the telegram she'd refused, of the path not taken. No regret touched her heart. Her students had learned their lessons well through the cold months. Samuel Jameson could now handle fractions and was reading above his grade level. Thomas Chen had started helping her with the younger children, showing a natural gift for teaching. The Christmas pageant had been such a success that the church ladies had commissioned her for Easter vestments. On this bright April morning, she walked toward the schoolhouse with a jar of apple butter from Mrs. Hartford and a sense of contentment she'd never known in her years of wandering. Her room at the boarding house was paid through summer. Her stomach no longer gnawed with constant hunger, and her mother's ring remained safe in its cloth wrapping. At the school steps, she found a stranger waiting, a woman in a traveling dress, dusty from the road. Miss Hollander? I'm Sarah Whitman from the Territorial Education Commission. I've heard remarkable things about your work here. Mercy set down her satchel. How can I help you, Mrs. Whitman? We're establishing a teacher training program in Cheyenne. We need experienced educators to help train the next generation of frontier teachers. The position comes with a significant salary increase and the chance to shape education across the territory. Another opportunity. Another choice. Mercy looked across the schoolyard, where her students would soon arrive for the day's lessons. Through the telegraph office window, she could see Mrs. Chen preparing for the morning's messages, Thomas at her side learning the rhythms of communication that connected their small town to the wider world. It sounds like important work, Mercy said carefully. It Island. You'd be helping establish schools in dozens of communities like Cedar Ridge. Think of the children who need what you can offer. A year ago, Mercy would have leaped at such a chance. Security, recognition, escape from the daily struggle of frontier life. But now she understood something about roots that went deeper than convenience or money. Mrs. Whitman, I'm honored by the offer, but my work is here. The woman looked surprised. Are you certain? This is a chance to make a real difference. Mercy smiled, thinking of Samuel's eager questions, of Thomas learning to teach, of the altar cloth that would grace Sunday services for years to come. I'm already making a real difference. After Mrs. Whitman left, Mercy unlocked the schoolhouse and prepared for the day. She arranged the primers on the reading table, sharpened pencils for arithmetic lessons, and wrote the day's scripture on the blackboard. Bloom where you are planted. The church bell struck 8, and her students began to arrive, children bundling through the door with lunch pails and eager faces, ready to learn whatever she could teach them about letters and numbers and the wide world that stretched beyond their small corner of the territory. Mercy Hollander took her place at the front of the room, no longer gnawing rotten apples in alleys, no longer a stranger seeking warmth in other people's kitchens. She had found her place, grown her roots, bloomed where she was planted. The morning lessons began. If something in this story touched you, linger with us. We'll handle the rest.